Lawyers of Reddit, what was your hold it moment where you knew you would win? I had a client who was accused of taking a young woman's car and then crashing it / fleeing the scene. The girl testified at the trial that she had given him the keys that night because she was drunk and would never ever drive and drink. Apparently, she was not aware that I had requested and obtained a copy of her driving record, which showed she received a DUI a month after the incident. I still remember the look on her face when I handed her the driving record and said, except that one time you got caught a month later, right? The look on the judge's face was equally memorable. We now have a Discord. Check out the server in the link in the description. Story 2. I'm not a lawyer, but I took my old landlord to court when I was in college. They stole my security deposit over BS. They claimed I trashed the place, not knowing that I took pictures and video when I moved in and out. Their evidence was a VHS quality recording of going through a perfectly clean apartment in better condition than it was when I moved in. But then they opened the top of the stove and found a single piece of elbow macaroni under it, holding it up triumphantly. That was the crux of their argument. The judge was not amused, and I got all of my money back, plus my lawyer fees and the filing fee. She then fought against her own lawyer to avoid paying him. Jerk. Story 3. I was reviewing the transcript of an interview with a child. The child made incriminating statements against my client. At one point when discussing the allegations, the child used an odd word, but I didn't think much of it. A few days later, I was watching a video of the child interacting with their grandmother, who hates my client, from about a week before that interview. The grandmother used the exact same odd word in the exact context the child later used it. At that moment, it became clear that the child had been coached. It was the first real aha moment of my career. Story 4. I worked on a case involving defective processors. In discovery, we got emails from the defendant's engineers that had worked on the processors. They were in an Asian country, but the emails were in English because they were going to US executives. One of the more senior engineers basically laid out the exact defect we were suing over, explaining what the problem was and why it was their fault, and finishing with, "This is big problem. We ship crap to customer." Needless to say, we hit them over the head with that in mediation, and they settled shortly after. Story 5. Not a lawyer, but I played one in small claims court. My lease had an exit clause that said if I fronted 2 months' rent, they would work to lease my place and return anything unused. I checked with the office ahead of time. They ensured me there was a waiting list, so I gave them the 2 months and moved. They never returned a dime. I talked to the new tenant and confirmed they moved in a week later. In court, the judge was commenting on how he didn't see anything explicitly saying they would return any unused rent, even though that intent was stated to me a few times. Dumbo from the leasing office piped in with, "Your Honor, in almost every case we can return some money, but in this case we didn't have a tenant in the 2 months after he left." So she gave the case back to me and I presented the affidavit from the new tenant, confirming the move-in date. Judge awarded me double what they owed. Turns out leasing office Dumbos 1 and 2 thought they could lie to me and return my excess rent money to themselves. Leasing office is technically a landlord, right? If so, that makes 2 landlord stories so far. Honestly, I kinda hope to see more. Landlords who are obviously in it just to lie to and exploit people who are renting from them, hate them so much. Story 6. It was my 3rd month of practice. I was in family law at the time, representing mom in a petition for a restraining order against boyfriend/dad. At issue in the broader case was child visitation, custody, support, etc. But today's hearing was just on the RO. We had pretty good facts, but it was mostly based on testimony of the parties. My client was way more reputable as a witness, so I was feeling confident. 10 minutes before the hearing, my client shows up. I give her a last-minute prep on what to expect, and then she says, "I'm glad I'm going through with this. I can't deal with it anymore, and he's just getting worse. To top it off, he left me a drunken, ranting voicemail on Saturday." You have the phone with you? Yes. We play the voicemail, and it's a full 2 minutes of ex-boyfriend screaming crap like, "I should have unalived you when we were together. You were always such a female dog. I hope you burn to death in a fire." I didn't have time to ask her why the hell she hadn't said anything to me about the voicemail before the bailiff called our case. We sit, the judge asks if either side has additional evidence, and I ask for permission to play the voicemail. Ex-boyfriend who didn't have an attorney didn't object, so I played the whole nasty 2-minute rant in open court. Judge goes, "We're going to take a brief recess before I issue my ruling. If the parties want to meet and confer in the hall, they are welcome to." Boyfriend knew he was screwed. We settled the whole case then and there. My client got her wish list in terms of custody, supervised visitation, child support, plus the restraining order to boot. I gotta say, a boyfriend trying to fight for these kinds of things in court unrepresented? There's no way he wins that, right? Ever? Like, don't get me wrong, this is a huge slam dunk, and he was done even if he had an attorney after this point, but what? Story 7. I'm a trial lawyer, and I have a ton of these. My favorite was probably a DUI where the cop was in a BWW with my client watching a fight. Like, the cop was standing at the bar in full uniform. Then when my client walked by him to leave, followed him out. Client was only actually going to his car to grab his phone charger because he was going home with the bartender. Like, he hadn't even closed his tab yet. Cop arrested him and charged him with DUI for opening his car door. Then fabricated this story for his report about how the client got into the car, turned it on, and began to pull out of the space to leave the parking lot. He also denied being inside the BWW on the stand under oath to my face. Surprise, I talked to the bartender at BWW and got the security tape. It very clearly, like surprisingly good quality, don't try to steal from a BWW by the way, showed cop standing at the bar, watching my client walk out the front door, and then follow him 30 seconds later. Parking lot cam also showed client barely touched the door handle before the cop stopped him. Just in case anyone is still lost because maybe they don't have the restaurant near them, because I don't and it took me a while to figure it out. BWW, Buffalo Wild Wings, I'm pretty sure. At first I thought it was like a misspelling of BMW, then it happened again and I had to rethink. Story 8. Not a lawyer. Years ago I had to do something at a strip mall in a bad part of town. Took me about 20 minutes and then I found that my car had been towed. I Ubered to the tow yard. Giant sign says, cash only. Had to call another Uber, drive to the ATM and back, and pay them $300-some. Got a crappy handwritten receipt that, believe it or not, was itemized. Went home, Googled, found out that they violated the law in 3 separate ways. Towed illegally refused to accept credit cards, and had multiple charges that the law called unreasonable, like dolly fees and load/unload fees. Took them to small claims court. The judge began by asking the tow yard owner about his relationship with the property owner, and how the decision was made to tow my car. "Oh," the slimy tow truck dude answered. "My cousin works there. If he says tow, I tow. It's 100% legal." The judge's eyebrows began to rise. "But," the dude continued, "but what I detest the most, Your Honor, is this jerk claiming that I don't take credit cards. I'm a businessman. I take credit cards all the time. He's a lowlife that does not have any credit cards. That's why he wanted to pay cash." I was having a hold it overload, and the judge saw me smiling and hopping in my seat and patting my manila folder of receipts. "Do you actually not have any credit or debit cards?" the judge asked me. I pulled out my wallet and showed him, and then pulled out a time-stamped photo of the cash-only sign I took the day of, and another one I took the morning of the hearing. The guy mumbled something like, "Okay, you got me there," and then nothing but, "Huh, I didn't know that," when the judge asked him about the legality of each unreasonable itemized charge. Anyway, each violation pays double the total tow charge, and since there were 3, that's how I made $1,800 on a $300 investment. Story 9. My client was accused of brutally murdering a dog. Cop testified that there was no testing of the blood, no body ever found, and admitted it could have, in fact, run away. The eyewitness said she could see the unaliving down the hallway from the dining room. Cop testified there was no hallway, and the dining room was on a different level of the house than the unaliving supposedly took place. Then the person who was leading the lynch mob against my client around town for the last year testified that she had been in the apartment between the 2 visits by the cop to evaluate the scene. No body, a compromised crime scene, witness who couldn't see anything, and admission that there was no proof the dog was dead. Closing argument lasted 3 seconds. Your Honor, I'm asking for an acquittal. Story 10. Not a lawyer, but we had no evidence that the woman who slammed into my stopped car going 85 miles per hour was drunk, until she indignantly admitted it on tape in her deposition. She busted into my deposition and demanded she go first because I was a lying female dog. She excitedly told my lawyer that the police report was wrong, because it said she was coming from the movie theater when she was actually coming from her friend's bar. Did you have anything to drink at your friend's bar? Of course. How many drinks? I don't know, they just keep my glass full. Did you take any medicine that day? Methadone and low blood pressure medicine. I see. The cops had refused to breathalyze her at the scene because her husband was a firefighter that they knew personally. They told her to go home, sober up, and go to the hospital later. I heard the whole thing, but had no proof until she handed it to me. They settled same day. Story 11. Not exactly a knew you would win moment, but I got a hidden shout out from a federal judge in a ruling that I considered to be one of the high points of my career. Here's what happened. Before hearing for an emergency injunction against USDA, I was watching the hearing before mine, a trademark infringement case. At the end of that hearing, the judge accidentally used a pun and could not stop laughing. She was literally crying. I decided at that moment I was going to intentionally use a pun in my hearing. I did. I accused USDA of engaging in a shell game by illegally diverting some federal funds to an egg industry trade group. The judge called me on it, but laughed heartily. My client won. The judge threatened to put the Secretary of Agriculture in jail. A major newspaper reporting on the case said the judge winced at my puns, but agreed with the arguments. False. When the written ruling was issued, the last sentence said that an injunction was issued against USDA's use of the funds for any plans they may be hatching. Undeniable shout out. Story 12. Obligatory, not mine, but my mom's story. She was fighting for custody on behalf of the father, trying to prove that the kids were living in subpar conditions with their drug-addicted mother, in spite of the ample child support provided. It was a tough case because courts are so hesitant to pull kids away from their moms. Then the mom burst out that she had been feeding the kids cat food as proof that she wouldn't let them starve. Needless to say, the judge did not take that as a good reason for the kids to stay with their mom. Story 13. Tried to sell my home myself, and the buyers wanted a term period for land contract before getting their own mortgage. I agreed to 1 year, had a simple contract drawn up, and after we both signed it, everything seemed fine. Within 30 days, they present me with their own legally drawn-up land contract that was pages long to protect their investment. On about page 3 or something, it very clearly stated that, if for any reason the home burns down, purchaser will receive all insurance proceeds. First, I still had a mortgage, and the proceeds would legally go to pay that off. Second, that's a pretty targeted thing to say. Not lawyers' terms of the house being destroyed and it's surrounded by woods and waterways, just if it burnt down. Page 4 stated that this would remain a land contract until my mortgage was paid in full, so they would never buy outright. I returned it to them with a letter stating those two things were never happening and I wasn't signing. They stopped paying, so I began eviction. 6 months later, the lawyer I hired was an idiot, and I'm sitting down with their lawyer myself. He brings out the contract they'd tried giving me and began talking about their ironclad case due to the agreement. I asked him to show me my signature. The look on his face when he realized it wasn't there. After we talked, it turned out he knew them and wrote the contract without the burn the house down stipulation. Seems that they added it. And under the belief it was a long-term land contract. Not only did I win, but I'm pretty sure they lost a lawyer friend. So were they just hoping that their lawyer friend would not notice that you changed his contract that he wrote? It's a weird play. You're kind of just hoping your lawyer friend is bad at his job. Story 14. So I filed the lawsuit in January. We exchanged discovery. Each side sends questionnaires and gets carefully worded answers over the next few months. And I file a motion for summary judgment, meaning I'm asking the court to let me win the case without a jury because the case is just so obvious. Right before I file this motion, I figure let's review the discovery materials and see if there's anything I missed. And what do you know? The other side made a massive mistake on literally just the 4th out of 100 plus questions that I asked. It's a dog bite case, and every single time I asked about the bite, the response says something along the lines of, "We admit to this and that, but we deny that our dog was involved in any dog attack." Well, question 4 asks whether they admit that their dog was not leashed on the day when it bit my client, and they simply answered, admit, meaning they admit their dog was not leashed, and they admit that their dog was the one that bit my client. That was the one thing that was genuinely in dispute. They tried to argue at the hearing that it was a mistake, and they only meant to admit to the lack of a leash. But the judge held them to their word. Most likely because the other evidence made it clear it could only have been their dog anyway. I gotta admit, the wording on that is a little tricky. Of course you're supposed to pay more attention when you're doing legal paperwork, but I could see how that could be kind of used as a gotcha and the person genuinely didn't know. Story 15. I knew the cops beat up my client and framed him. They described a knife in his possession that caused them to fear for their safety. Oddly, they never seized it. We won the criminal case and filed a civil rights case. While deposing one, he described the knife in great detail. No more than 3 minutes later, he slipped up and claimed his partner told him my guy had a knife, but he never saw it himself. I told him, "That's not what you just said," and saw him panic. His lawyer panicked too, and asked to see me outside. When we got into the hallway, I withdrew my settlement demand, and the case settled for a substantially larger amount within 45 minutes. Story 17. I'm not a lawyer, but I've been up against plenty of them as a union chief steward. Years ago, we had an arbitration related to healthcare costs. The company spent the better part of a year trying to break us from pursuing the case. The day had come for our arbitration. The lawyer, there were 3 actually, we were up against was actually Paul Newman's nephew. Anyway, it was my turn to take the stand. His first question to me was presenting the grievance as evidence. and asking me what step it said it was on at the top of the page. Our grievance process is a 2-step system, progressing to arbitration if it's not settled. I said, second step. Then he smugly asks, and where is the first step? To which I replied, the first step is a verbal discussion. It goes into writing at the second step. He looked hurt, but persevered anyway. A few more questions in, he asked, if the entire company got base level insurance instead of a premium option, that would satisfy the contract? At this point, he was hoping I would argue that the base level insurance wasn't sufficient, because he was trying to paint the picture that we were just trying to get premium insurance at base level price. I respond with, yes. He looked dumbfounded, asked me, yes? I said again, yes, that would satisfy the language in the contract. He kinda looked at his other papers he was going to submit as evidence, and then muttered, no further questions. I knew at that moment that they had brought no real argument to the table. We got our answers from the arbitrator 6 weeks later, during a contract negotiations meeting. It was insanely satisfying watching them read the email during one of the sessions, and the immediate shift in demeanor from their side of the table. They got real quiet. We were awarded 100% of the arbitration, full payback for all employees that were being overcharged, and reduced rate for the premium insurance. Story 18. Not a lawyer, but a client. In my divorce trial, my ex-wife has spent about 2 hours explaining to the court what a POS I was, and all the horrible things I'd done to her and my children, and that I was unfit to be a parent. 2 solid hours, lie upon lie. Just 6 months earlier, my wife had snuck into my house, the one she's moved out of, and went onto my computer to type me a love letter. Oh, you're so wonderful. You're such an amazing father, great provider, great husband. You've done so much for the community. Please don't leave me. That's the gist of it. Well, she didn't print it or sign. It was just a file on my computer left on the screen for me to find. So, our challenge, after all her testimony to the contrary, get her to admit that she wrote the letter. I told my attorney, ask her. She won't be able to lie if she's sworn in. Plus, she's going to feel incredibly guilty about all these lies. So he handed her a printout. He had one too. He started reading it. He asked her, do you remember writing this letter? Her face was shriveling. She looked at her attorney and said, I'm sorry, Sandy, her attorney's first name. Then she looked at the courtroom and said, yes, I wrote this. There was a silence for a few moments. Then the judge said, attorneys, in my chambers, now. The attorney told me later, the judge understood that when your wife said, I'm sorry, Sandy, that meant her attorney was aware this letter might be brought up and that she had instructed her client to lie. The judge was furious. Back in the courtroom, my attorney went down the list, lie by lie. Did he really do this? Did he really do that? When you say he was doing this, wasn't it really that, etc.? Then he had her read the entire letter again. After that, my divorce went from me being half an inch away from losing all custody and relegated to supervised visits to getting full custody. Made for TV or what?